Hello, Jen here. We thought it'd be nice as Standard Issue turns 10 on the 30th of September 2024 to go back and look at some of our old interviews and pick out some of our favourites, which is very, very hard to do actually. But yeah, one of the ones that I remember very well is chatting to musician, actor, now an author, and one half of Let's Get Down with the Trumpets, Rizzle Kicks, Jordan Stevens. Jordan had just written an article about the way that toxic masculinity harms men, and it had gone viral. It was a huge thing at the time. And I went to his home and met him and his lovely rescue dog, whose name I can't remember, but he was great. And we chatted about the way that the system, gender stereotypes are bad for both men and women, about redefining gender stereotypes, about the harm that he felt that gender stereotypes had done to him as a man, and about how putting men on a pedestal doesn't really do them any good either. He was, I felt, wise beyond his years, very sensitive, very thoughtful. I really enjoyed chatting to him. I sort of wanted to adopt him afterwards. I can't, it would be weird, but we had a fantastic chat and I really hope you enjoy listening to it. I'm speaking to writer, performer, and you may know him better as the Rizzle of Rizzle Kicks, Jordan Stevens. Jordan, welcome.
Hello.
Jordan's also very good at guessing the sugar content of various kitchen items.
Spreads.
Spreads, yeah. Jam and Nutella.
I'm a fan of both. Maybe at the same time.
I think that would be gross.
No. Think about it. It's like dipping strawberries in chocolate.
Yeah, but if you had in like a box of Quality Street or whatever...
The strawberry cream one is the best. I love that one. You're shocked by that? I also like the coffee revel.
We are talking about, obviously, it's International Men's Day next week.
Finally, we get a day.
Finally. It's about time.
I've been waiting for that. TikTok, do you know what I mean?
Near enough.
I know. We just want more attention.
So you wrote an article for The Guardian, which I remember seeing the headline for and thinking, like, what does this Rizzle Kick know about
Yeah, what do I know?
Gender inequality? But I have to say, it is probably one of the most insightful pieces I've ever read.
Really?
About gender inequality.
Thank you.
Very good.
It came from pure pain.
From pure pain. I wanted to know a bit, before I sort of wang on about that forever, I wanted to know a bit about what you think constructs or conditioning in society is sort of handing out to young men and how they're so damaging.
I think the most interesting aspect of this conversation now is why now? I think that's a good way to work back from that. Okay. So you think, like, what is it about this period in time that suddenly it's a magnifying glass on, like, wait, why are you guys doing this? Because, you know, traditionalists and various people will argue that things worked. Things worked, you know what I mean? Like, why is everyone causing a fuss? They worked. Yeah. And the reality is, there's always been challenge, but you never really hear about it. So the wonderful thing about the internet is it unites minorities and gives people a platform, and people go, oh, hold on, I think that too. And particularly with women, or this wave of feminism, or feminism in general, there's, you know, standing up and going, actually, I'm not into this at all. And it's created a shift. I think it's like rumbled or ruffled the feathers or the fabric of how men conducted themselves. I think a lot of men's anchoring, especially in their emotional world, it was surrounding a level of entitlement and protection, I say, from motherly figures and a patriarchal world. And by patriarchal, I mean a society that punishes femininity in any context, whether you're a woman or a gay man or a man who's effeminate, or, you know, vulnerability is seen as a weakness, this kind of thing.
When you say femininity, you mean like what society
deems as feminine? Yeah, totally. Yeah, completely. They're completely. That's the maddest thing about it. Yeah. These energies that we assign like various roles to are all contained within everyone. But you are shifted towards certain things by an entire society. You know, in the same way, I think the simplest example is like, just if I wore a skirt, which I'd love to because I want my legs to be free, it would genuinely make more people uncomfortable than if a woman wore like a... But there's an unconscious bias towards masculinity. It's like, oh yeah, but that's not... She's been a man, isn't it? And putting it on is not sexy. I own her. But with this, it's like, oh, what, you a bit gay or what? You know, it's weird. I just think it's odd. That's a very tangible example, but that can get echoed emotionally as well. But I think that there's a push for it now because firstly, people are getting tired of being treated like shit. And the statistics around male mental health, addiction rate, suicide are now readily available and overwhelming. It now seems, especially if you have an interest in mental health and you have an interest in, I suppose, a more harmonious life or a compassion, feminism just seems logical, yeah. And I think, now more than ever, I think the drive is... Well, my personal opinion, without getting too existential, is that masculinity does need to be revised. Because if you were to maybe pitch the ideas of a patriarchal world against maybe even a matriarchal world, or whether just a genuinely more egalitarian society, it wouldn't be like the best poster right now for... You know what I mean? As if you were going, wait, no, trust me, it works with men in positions of power for short periods of time. And like, really? Why? It's like, well, we have one guy who's tweeting another guy about World War III. What
drove you to write that piece about toxic masculinity?
I was driven to write that piece because I was sick of myself, basically. I say last year I was bordering on a messiah complex, I think, a little bit. I was still in the shadows, but I was writing and I was very sure that I had these things to say and people would commend me for it. And like, and I was...
Including that piece?
No, this is before I wrote it. So I was around going... In fact, before that point, I was like an outspoken feminist, which is a new breed of man, which I think, where I was pointing the fingers at a lot of people like, yo, listen, man, I'm all about gender equality, like, fucking damn right. I love my mum, and this is ridiculous. And I was writing quite deeply emotional pieces about, like, men being unkind. Meanwhile, I'm a total dickhead. Seriously, like, I was treating my ex like shit. I mean, not as, I would like to believe, not as blatantly, but in very, I had really deep, say, intimacy issues and would hold people at arm's length. Wasn't very emotionally attentive, long periods of kind of like very subtle abusive patterns to myself as well. I mean, that's how it works, right? And so I got into a new relationship and it totally knocked me back, this one. And then when the traumas came up, which happens in most relationships, like the amount of darkness they brought out of me was wild. And I destroyed the relationship and I was like, no, I've been here. Do you know what I mean? I was like, I've actually been here like 3 times now. Whenever a woman has tried to get too close, I've done something nuts. So I was like, I've just got to have a look at that, really. So I just stayed sober, which was probably one of the hardest things. I had grown men suggesting to me that I should just get mash up and like hook up with other women.
Which is what a lot of men would do.
Yeah, and women, to be fair. I think generally there is argument to suggest that you can numb yourself for a bit, but for whatever reason... I just sat in it and it was so rubbish and it was so painful, and I'm only just coming out of the other side of it now, but feel great for it. But it's like, my God, the writing, the article was a survival thing. I didn't get commissioned or anything. I ran away to Brazil, as I found out many men do, which is another horrendous narrative I fell in. Apparently, if you're a bit of a creative romantic, I bet you just run off somewhere, don't you? You just go, I can't take this breakup, I'm going to go... And I was just like, I proper thought I was an individual, and then like I spoke to the ex and she was like, yeah, the guy before that did that. And I was like, for fuck's sake, it's nothing. I'm just running into these stereotypes. But yeah, so I was totally romanticising it. But whatever, I did actually go and do some real work. I tripled my therapy. I went to stay with my uncle in Brazil. I just wrote this piece and read it to him, and he was like, mate, you should publish that. And I was like, for real? And he's like, yeah. So I openly tweeted, does anyone work for The Guardian? And a mate of mine just hit me up and put me in touch. And irony, I'd spent the whole year before being like readying myself to be this like advocate of women's rights on the basis I was just speaking up against men, actively against them. So there's probably some kind of self-hatred going on there, when actually I managed to make more of an impact from looking at myself. And when all that went viral, I was literally crying in a car park in Brazil. I was actively still heartbroken. It was this bizarre thing where it was kind of like, obviously, if I'm just actually honest about myself, and it totally coincided with both worlds, with mental health and gender equality, because I was having to do triple therapy to avoid antidepressants because I just didn't have the emotional toolkit to deal with that level of agony, and there must have been a reason why, and it was to do with not only my building as a young man, but also how that manifested via fame, and then also how that manifested with people considering me to be like an alpha male, or you know, when I've got into these discussions, people have gone, well, you've benefited from hypergamy, women love you because you're a whatever, and I just think to myself, like, I mean, whatever, man, I wanted to kill myself, like, do you know what I mean? And that's not right, so I want to have a look at how to help people not feel like that, you know?
It's quite interesting to me that you describe your pulling away from intimacy as abusive behaviour.
Yeah.
But for a lot of women, the experience of someone doing that to them is like really normal.
Yeah.
Like, so to me, because of the way conditioning I've had through society, I wouldn't even necessarily
see that as
abusive behaviour.
Well, I think distance is actually loving. If we're looking at it from a healthy perspective, space is great. It's more to do with not knowing what's good for you, I think, and I think both people. I can't speak. I have done some workshops. I did a lot of intense stuff with this, so I can only reiterate what I believe is true for me, which is that more often than not, you're going to end up with someone who is reflecting a side of you that you need, or that you are missing. So loud people often end up with, not all the time, but often end up with quieter people, more subdued. And then it's similar with attachment issues. Quite often, anxious attachment ends up with, that's wild. So an anxious attachment is with an avoidant attachment, just because it's kind of I feel like you remind each other of how your parents treated you.
I'm reading a book about this at the moment, actually, and there is also a theory that, well, there's two different theories. So there's one theory that if you have anxious attachment, you confuse drama, really, with love. Yeah. So you get used to sort of feeling like about someone, and then that kind of...
You live off it.
Then you think that's love, when actually that's just discomfort. And then the other theory is that there's lots of avoidance in that.
Well, Alan de Botton, I don't know, he's amazing. He said that essentially he believes we're actually drawn to people who we know will make us suffer, because that's what we identify as love, because we often have... It's bleak, but it's kind of true, and you can deal with it. It's just if you're aware. The intimacy thing is like... maybe abusive is too far. It can go to that extent if there's not an understanding of the other person's experience. So... I do, I'm working through this with my girlfriend now. I do understand space is loving, and I've made that clear, and she sometimes finds space is threatening. But in just open communication about it, you find balance, you know what I mean? Whereas before, I suppose maybe I think it would verge on abuse because I would actually actively be keeping someone at arm's length. And a lot of the time, I wanted the intimacy. You know, it's like a weird thing where... Now I know what I need, or I'm admitting to myself the benefits of that kind of contact and communication. Now I can start to bargain with, okay, I get that, and now what do I need in order to be creative or whatever else? Whereas at that time you're just working purely unconsciously, and you're like, nah, get out of my face. Do you know what I mean? Or like, nah, I don't want to see you. Like, or like get frustrated. I think for men especially, frustration and anger is like a real language of vulnerability, you know? So it's like... Someone can be like, well, you want to hang out tonight? I'd be like, well, just get off me. Do you know what I mean? So it's that. And it's actually, and really with my ex, it's not, even though I can make light of it, it was probably quite strenuous for the both of us emotionally.
So when you say you didn't have the toolkit to deal with how you felt, what do you mean exactly?
So I think I have a belief that my definition of the word privilege is the option of avoiding pain. That's how I look at it. So the most privileged person in the world could, if they want, avoid pain for their entire life. Now, what I also believe about pain is that pain is essential to growth. So quite often, and it's kind of unavoidable because no one has that much privilege. Do you know what I mean? So quite often, I think in these scenarios, you end up with people who are privileged, in inverted commas, who end up with awful, destructive, And I think, largely speaking, with men and women, I feel as though, from my experience of women, even if we were just to take the menstrual cycle, there's like 5 days or 6 days in a month where I've seen women around me, they have to get on with shit. Like, it's not even like things stop. Yeah. It's like you actually like, you're like, my hormones are fucking all over the shop. And I've got to ready myself, and I feel that it's a lot. And the build-up, the entire situation, it's like that understanding that is transient, and then stuff on the other side, and that is something that just flows through you. It's like, if you're a guy in Western society, in Western culture, especially if you're middle class and up, you don't ever experience that. You don't ever experience someone saying to you like, "Oh, we're gonna make life really difficult for you for 6 days for no fucking reason."
Yeah.
Well, for a great reason, but
Yeah.
And we don't have any like initiation things. We don't have any of those moments where you go, "Oh, I'm a man now." So you end up with like a lot of boys going into their like late 20s, early 30s with a kind of arrested development, because you can just get mashed up and you can do this and that, and no one's really going to punish you for that. You know what I mean? And you make mistakes and women deal with it, and you emotionally labour. You know what I mean? I went to a workshop about domestic abuse the other day, and you're most likely to commit it from the ages of like 18 to 27. You know, that's you would have thought it'd be that kind of typical angry husband, but it's fucking not. It's people finding the boundaries, and it's because there's not that period. And if you look at it culturally around the world, when they have even what you consider to be like more, I don't know, stripped back initiation, from like native cultures or whatever else, it's always to do with pain. It's always to do with, and it's like you accept the pain, and it's that surrender that moves you forward. We just don't have that. So when I say toolkit, I mean, listen, this is my life, innit? Like, yeah, I had a difficult life in that me and my mum never had much money, but I always had a happy disposition. I was dealing with a lot of unconscious trauma, but, we all are. I got to school, and then I became famous. And then I, like, have all that shit, and then I'm rich enough at that point to, like, to buy enough drugs to keep me numb. So when it actually came down to me stopping, I had never experienced that. Do you know what I mean? Like, and the first thing I cried about after this breakup was my grand dying. So it's like it was like I'd been suspended, and I find that a lot with guys is it's like you can navigate the stuff, you drink enough, you chat rubbish enough, you delude yourself enough, but emotion will get you eventually. And quite often when it hits us, suicide is the thought of going, I would rather not exist than wait until this passes. That's essentially the makeup of it. Or it's the level of apathy, the level of like that such little compassion for yourself to be like, it's okay that you feel this way. And then you go, all right. And that I find that heartbreaking. And that's what I mean from a toolkit. And I remember now, and now I feel positive and I understand more how to deal with the emotions that face me. But at the time I was like, this is so overwhelming. I would actually rather not exist. And that mentality was like, that's mad. And there's that idea of connection that we just don't seem to have, I'm genuinely quite proud to say in my mind, and I want to hold myself to this, if I was to ever feel suicidal again, the reason I would pull myself out of it is because of the people around me. Genuinely. That's a real testament to me having got myself out of quite a deep level of intimacy issues, because I was like, I think I wouldn't want to put them through that.
My eldest brother committed suicide. When I was 21, so a while ago now. Well, it's interesting to me, obviously, for lots of reasons, but I think the toolkit you're talking about is, like the process of
the foresight, or like or just the freedom to feel confident enough that there is another. My ex-girlfriend's brother also killed himself. Do you mind me asking how old he was?
He was 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. And I'm really sorry that happened. And I think it's like the youth. It's like you get to an age and you have never, and then you hold it in. When I wrote that article, some of the most devastating emails I got were from wives being like, "You just left behind 2 kids. I didn't know. What can I do to help?" And it's just like breaks my heart, because it's like it's actually not down to women.
Did you have like any inkling of how bad things could get for you before this breakup happened?
No.
So you just thought you were fine?
I didn't think I was fine. I had like a panic attack earlier in the year. So I was like, oh, that's normally a sign that something's going on. Because I don't suffer from anxiety, but now in hindsight I actually had quite severe anxiety, but I just like worked off it. It was like my petrol. But now, man, it's just like every day. It was at a point where I woke up and was upset that I was awake, So it's like those. It's just abandonment, isn't it? I think everyone has it. Everyone at some point, parents do the best they can with what they have, and girls have it hard. The connection between the mother and the daughter is a tough one. Father and son essential. And then in reverse, it differs. You know, you get a whole thing where a mum can almost be too loving and remove the sense of strength and identity from a boy, and you have a...
It's a kind of like a mad entitlement, isn't there? Because I've got another brother who's 18 months older than me.
Right.
And I love him, he's great. But I do see these little flashes of entitlement in him that really bother me. I think he's just been pedestalled, basically.
Yeah.
His entire life. And I think men are pedestalled a lot more than women are. And I think a lot of the time they do have this kind of sense of entitlement. One of the things I actually wanted to ask you about was about that article, because it was quite self-critical and critical in a constructive way, I think, but like there would be a lot of men that would read that article and feel like a sense of discomfort because they will identify with what you've written about yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Did you get many men who were defensive about it, or...
Yeah, well, only one from memory. One guy sent an email to my record label, weirdly. It was, like, fucking fuming. And he worked somewhere else. I think when you come with that level of anger, it's quite clear that it's... To be honest, a lot of my mates, man, were hitting me up like, I feel you. I was quite surprised. I mean, I was so wrapped up in my own sadness as well. It was difficult to really... Because I couldn't be anyone's therapist, you know what I mean? I was suddenly like, I can't believe this has resonated with anyone, like... I was trying to figure out that part of life. But yeah, no, most of the feedback was like, I mean, like the kid in my school, there's one kid in my school who's like a proper fighter. And he just hit me up and was just opened up about it and grieving. And I was like, wow, that's mad, you know? And I think a lot of guys just, they suffer in silence because there's never a right time to be honest about how they feel. So people go, mate, that was... And I think the good thing was that I think it presented an opportunity for relationship conversation as well. I think girls to like send it like, you know...
Wait, mate.
Yeah. My ex-girlfriend didn't like it.
No?
Can't lie. They were like, oh, now you figured it out. Good one. I was like, sorry. It's all I can do, really.
Yeah.
But I get it. I do understand that. Negatively only really started to happen when I was brought into debates on television and stuff off the back of it. I think the most I get from people is, which I'm interested in, is there's this kind of like very defensive male standpoint. The most annoying one I get is that toxic masculinity is, oh God, it's like a term. It's like a poisonous term. So I'm writing an article at the moment about a different term. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's actually quite fragile to be upset by toxic masculinity because by it having the word toxic, it obviously doesn't infer that masculinity is bad. Otherwise, it'd just be masculinity. But it actually infers it's good. Otherwise, it wouldn't have a toxic side. But that was a lot of the thing. Like, I don't think this term toxic masculinity is really helping guys in prison who don't have dads. And I was like, what? And I mean, this isn't on a television debate. I was like, what do you mean? He was like, I just think, like, why would they want to hear toxic masculinity? I was like, well, it sounds like their dads have been quite toxically masculine. You just got to, like, you have to just accept these realities in order for progress to a more beautiful side of masculinity. So that's been contentious, is the term, which is like, oh, get past it. And then the whole idea of hypergamy and the fact that women contribute to the patriarchy, which is a genuine conversation, but it's always weaponized. And I think once, if there's more accountability, then I'm sure there'll be toxic sides to femininity that will be discussed. But it's like, I think the diversion of it is a bit soon, personally. But I think it's things where men are like, well, all right, if masculinity is so bad, then how come women go out with men who are... Basically, you know, hypergamy is the notion of sexual economy. It's like, I'll have sex with you because I'm beautiful, give me your money. Yeah. It's a very, very simplified version of it. And it happens in small amounts. Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's like, cool, I get it, but I just, because the patriarchy is foundations are in the sexual repression of women, I just find that difficult to, you can't blame a gender who have had to survive. They've had to create mechanisms to survive. I
think it's also about internalised misogyny, isn't it?
100%.
Like we're brought up in a society that celebrates masculinity or men and diminishes women. And we internalise a lot of that. And I think, you know, there's similar things on, like, racial lines and class lines.
Totally.
It's something that happens. And so I think that's probably why men are sometimes a bit defensive about it, because I suppose it's like when people say, white people are like this. And sometimes I'm a bit like, oh, but I'm not like that. And it's like, well, then if you're not, then you're cool, do you know?
Yeah.
I'm not criticising you if you're not. and I think men maybe feel a bit like, oh, but I'm not like that, or you just can't see the other person's perspective. You are privileged because something about your physical makeup or whatever has been celebrated in society. So you have internal...
I think, yeah, it feels like a criticism, and I think generally speaking, because of whatever was taken away from a child's experience based on this gender construct as a child, whether that's sexual repression or whether that's this enforced strength, it does lead to an element of fragility, not sensitivity. So, you know, sensitivity being that is sad for me, but cool. Fragility is like where you get defensive about it, and you know, there's a massive. I felt that. I felt within a breakup, I fancy myself to not have an ego at one point. Went for this breakup, and I was thinking things that were so wild, and I'm thinking like, it's mad that I'm thinking those things in terms of like, this is what I deserve, or this person should be speaking to me. Yeah. It's like, nah. That powerlessness is something you don't really experience as a man, and you're never taught that it's actually something to be proud of. It's all about accumulation and domination. So yeah, when someone feels like they're going at you, but I don't know. That's the most contentious thing is like toxic masculinity as a term, but I just think it's like just so boring. Just the most of the battle as well is like men going into statistics as well and being like, well, the smartest people in the world are men, and so are the dumbest, and women are in the middle, and it's just it's not
a very clever argument, is it, when you think about the people who've been given the power to get to...
I think it's one of those things of a few making it difficult for many.
Yeah.
So there'll be a few extreme feminists or whatever who will be like bordering on misandry, who are like, once we get to the top, like, you guys are fucked. Or whatever, which, you know, understandable. But like...
But that's not feminism, as I understand it.
But they can say it is, and then that will latch on to another person, or they'll be like, you know, once we get equality of opportunity, everything will change, and women will run this and that and that, and then these people will then go into their views of like, well, actually, what? So you're going to all run building sites, you know that we're stronger. And it's like, in those situations, it's like, what we could all benefit from are conversations that don't have any agenda. So it's like, sure, men are stronger, so I don't see necessarily there being an influx in female builders, but I'm saying that maybe if we looked at the difference in opportunity for like the female equivalent of a builder or whatever, do you know what I mean? There are more beneficial ways of having that conversation rather than being like, you're being stupid.
I think it's interesting that people take it as a criticism of themselves rather than society.
Well, that's another thing I feel as well. We were in such an age of identity politics. Sometimes I just need to remind myself to be a nice person. No, but honestly, because sometimes I think, no, I shouldn't really know about all of this stuff. All I need to know is how to be warm. It's something that you forget, you know? When you go like, well, no, because this is happening somewhere, and that, and da-da-da, and that's all good. Yeah. But then, like, someone at the bus stop, you know, you just be like, hey, how you doing, you know?
Obviously, we talk about gender inequality being shit for women most of the time, but I totally believe that it's shit for men as well.
Right.
And that there are pressures on you guys as well. How can women be better allies to men?
Wow, that's mad.
Do women need to be more understanding of men? Pressures they face.
I think women are naturally quite compassionate, to be honest. This is what I instinctively want to say. And as a disclaimer, all my opinions are fluid. I think that what will benefit men the most are healthier boundaries. And I mean that in the space of women are naturally compassionate and nurturing, which is fantastic. Men need to be too, and can be. Well, generally speaking, there's this idea that femininity is. And I think that I'm starting to understand that the, again, distance or the decision to not help or aid or can sometimes be a really powerfully loving tool, because there's a difference between empowering and enabling, you know? So there's that scene in Ray I saw, it was shown the other day, where young Ray Charles has just started to lose his vision, and he's screaming for his mum's name while he's stumbling around, and his mum is there, silent, crying. And he calms down and starts to listen and orientates himself. And that's like it's a Hollywood film, but like genuinely, I thought it was quite a profound example of like, I know there's situations where my mum wouldn't have actually allowed me to fend for myself because of this enormous amount of love she wanted to provide. Or in a lot of relationships that become toxic, men are piling on this emotional pressure and women are just totally there. and not knowing how to help and not knowing why the help isn't working, because actually it becomes like a crutch rather than a... So I think once we get into a stage where, despite how the media depicts us and despite the stories we're told, we develop like a good, strong core set of values and love for ourselves, we'll start to send a different message. And I think for women especially, that's so hard, because you're born and society's like, yeah, you're shit. And then you kind of got to work up and from that. Yeah. And you have to be like unbelievably successful to suddenly start being like, oh, I can do what I fucking want. And then you realise the economy is different for you. And you go, I don't need to be walking around looking like this and that for whoever. Or if whatever. Or, I don't know. Or like you're in a, you know what I mean? You're not in his press. I did a talk the other day, and a comedian said to me, you know, well, the thing about the girls is, you know, they do like a bad boy. And it's like, well, my opinion is, well, if you believe you should be treated in such a way, then there's more of a move for it. But I also believe if women started to be like, not into bad boys, I promise you how quickly these bad boys would turn into like the most loving, open guys. Because a lot of men are driven by that, the being desirable. So it's like, I just think for women, it would be what I'd actually say to everyone, which is that if you have a really core understanding of what you deserve and how you treat yourself, and don't allow for other narratives to affect your outlook, then I think you'd find the people around you would benefit from that too.
So you've got your own podcast, haven't you?
The Whole Truth, yeah.
Yeah, so where can we find that?
If you type in The Whole Truth onto podcasts, I don't know, Apple...
podcast.com.
then you'll find...
on your podcast channel of choice.
And also, if we are on the topic of gender, read this book by Thomas Page McBee, who I just interviewed on The Whole Truth. Mm-hmm. It's called Amateur, and this is about a trans man who we rarely hear from trans men, so it's very exciting. True, yeah. And he transitioned at 30, so he experienced both sides, and it is like, in this time when we're deliberating, this guy's like, yeah, but I mean, I've literally seen and felt the shift. It's really incredible. So if anyone wants to know more about gender, I'd say is painfully honest and beautiful, and he's great.
And we can hear him on your podcast, The Whole Truth.
Yeah.
Which deals with all sorts of stuff.
Mental
like
health. Just little bits. Yeah, just it's nice to ask people what they do to keep themselves balanced and stuff.
Where can we find you on Twitter?
My current @s are @AlTheNative, which is a play on the word alternative, although it might change soon. So just generally type in Jordan Stevens and I should pop up.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.